Good morning to you. Thank you for joining us. The show is Good Morning Africa. My name is Miriam Ogoto. It is nice to have you today, the second day of November 2000 and 22. I trust that your day has started off quite well. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're tuned in and joining us from. About 4 minutes past 10 a.m. here in Nairobi, Kenya. Let's just get into it, and we start by looking at the headlines from across Africa, and we start with those from Kenya. And the Daily Nation from Kenya, the main headline, 50 days of Ruto regime. Today marks the 51st day of William Ruto era, and amidst the optimism of a new regime and the pregnant promise of a organized government lies the hopes and fears of millions of Kenyans caught in the whirlpool of tough economic times. How he navigates the oil crisis, the taxation headache, and the state capture probe will plot the trajectory of his first 100 days in office. That story is on page 4, 5, 8, and 9. Some analysis there inside the Daily Nation this morning. Abdi Nasir and Kip Korir in ugly court battle. Those lawyers up there. If you're interested, that story is in there on page 2. A life of misery for Kenya's poor cancer patients. That story is on page 10. The Star newspaper, the main headline, EACC probes 18 billion Kenya shillings Uhuru era energy deal. Report concludes Turkana wind farm mismanaged, taxpayers paid for blunders. That story is on page 4 and 5 on the Star newspaper. But their items don't belong to Indians, drivers say officials. That story is on page 6. Adida, 65 Jumbo matriarch of Tavo Park, dies of old age. That story is on page 3. And hunger forces husbands out of homes as girls trade in sex. Okay, there's quite something there. The story is on page 23. So the husbands are hungry and they're running away, or they can't provide for their family, so they decide to disappear. But the story is in there. I'll read it later. The Standard newspaper, the main headline, Kinoti left exposed in shake-up. The ground beneath former DCI boss George Kinoti is shifting fast. A section of the men he commanded are in custody as the investigation into the operations gathers pace. Yesterday, his successor Mohammed Amin dispersed the last of his allies, including the officer who admitted framing DP Gachagua at his behest so far-flung areas. The story is on page 4. Lawmakers begin big fight to rescue CDF. You'll find that on page 6. Dollar shortage risks foreign investment is in there. KQ pay standoff escalates, and World Cup stars to watch as we gear up towards the World Cup in Qatar. There's a story on that on page 39 and 40 on the Standard. Shocking details on Mama Lucy Hospital and death of Dida, one of Africa's largest jumbos there in our national parks. So that is what we have on the leading newspapers this morning from Kenya. So let's shift our attention and look at some newspapers from across the continent of Africa. We start with the Sowetan. That is from South Africa. Show us the money. Activists call on President Cyril Ramaphosa to prove his support for fight against gender-based violence. And I think I do have that story in details just in a short while. The Herald, this is from Zimbabwe, step up electric car game or else. That is what we have there. Is it really from Zimbabwe? I think from South Africa. The Daily Monitor, Spy Nation, that is from Uganda. And then there's one there from Uganda, but it's written in a language I can't read, so I'll just keep that. New Vision from Uganda. Teacher upgrade, government offers 8,000 scholarships. That is in the New Vision. The Newsday from Zimbabwe. Polls land grabs haunt ZANU PF. The Daily News as well from Zimbabwe. ED government open to a peace summit, and I think that was the same headline we had here yesterday, that there possibility of violence according to some reports, even as Zimbabwe gears towards its elections next year. And so peace talks could be a good idea to try and see what is it that could plunge that country into a chaos. I mean, we have enough going already in this continent. If we can put out some of these fires early enough, and dialogue usually is very useful in such instances. The Guardian from Nigeria as well, rift widens in southwest over Afenifere's endorsement style, and that is what we have in some of the newspapers from across the continent of Africa. So now I'd like to bring us some news in a bit of details from across the continent. The latest, we start with Somalia. The U.S. has sanctioned the Islamic State group IS in Somalia, and several of its alleged members say to be smuggling arms in East Africa. The IS mainly operates in the country's northeast, where it targets security forces and civilians in attack. Despite receiving regional and international support, Somalia continues to grapple with deadly militant violence. IS Somalia has been active the Horn of African nations since 2015. The sanctioned individuals are accused of providing support to the group's intelligence unit, smuggling arms across East Africa, and coordinating high-profile attacks. Some were former members of Al-Shabaab group. In October, the U.S. blacklisted several Al-Shabaab members, also said to be trafficking weapons between Somalia and Yemen, where Al-Qaeda and Islamic State are entrenched. Violent attacks by Somalia's militant groups have claimed many lives and instilled widespread fear. Somalia is heavily dependent on international support to disrupt illicit arms and financing networks aiding activities by Al-Shabaab and the Islamic State. We go to Tanzania, and the army has deployed hundreds of troops to help firefighters who have been battling fires on Africa's highest peak, Mount Kilimanjaro, for close to 2 weeks now. Army officials say the Tanzania's People Defense Force TPDF will cooperate with other agencies and volunteers to ensure the fire is controlled early before it causes more damage to vegetation on the mountain. And a series of wildfire have been breaking out in different areas on the mountain after an initial fire started near a camp along a popular hiking route on the 21st of October. Hundreds of people, including firefighters, national park staff, tour guides and civilians, have been battling to put out the fresh fire with little success. The cause of the fires is not yet known, but the government says human activities are most likely to blame. I mean, it started near a camping site, so that's a very high probability an accident there happened. So anyway, we move on to Malawi, and activists who've been released on bail say they will continue nationwide protest to demand decisive action against official corruption and want all those who misbehave in public office to be arrested. A social media influencer, Joshua Chisambele, and his colleague Levi Luwembe, together with 4 other leaders of a grouping calling itself Action Against Impunity, were arrested on Friday on charges related to inciting violence. The activists pleaded not guilty to the charges. There was a heavy presence of police at the court in Lilongwe on Monday and Tuesday, where sympathizers gathered to offer solidarity to the protest leaders. After some reports emerged, let me just get that one more time. All right, so there was a heavy presence of police at the Lilongwe court on Monday and Tuesday, where sympathizers had gathered to offer solidarity to the protest leaders after reports emerged that they had been physically assaulted while in police custody. Police deny assaulting the activist, but highly regarded rights watchdog, the Malawian Human Rights Commission, has launched a probe into the assault allegations. Speaking upon their release, Mr. Luwembe said he and his colleagues will not give up the fight in spite of their arrest and alleged ill treatment while in police custody. We go to South Africa. Gender-based violence and femicide cases continue to rise in South Africa as violent men in the country are targeting children and elderly women. The country's President Cyril Ramaphosa has said. He was speaking during the second presidential summit on gender-based violence and femicide. According to the president, data from the South Africa's police service shows that sexual offences and rape increased by 13% between 2017 to 2018 and 2021 and 2022. Murders of women and children are also on the rise, he added. And the process towards a single currency for the countries that form the East African Community EAC is years behind schedule. That is according to Rwanda's President Paul Kagame. On Tuesday, he said during a meeting at the Legislative Assembly of the 7-member bloc in Kigali, Mr. Kagame said the EAC is currently underfunded and thus delaying the implementation of projects and programs. He added that despite the delay, the East African Monetary Institute was necessary for achieving the monetary union. The bloc has set July 2021 to start the EAMI, the precursor to the East African Central Bank, and a single currency by 2024. Analysts say the political and economic rows between the bloc of 7 countries have been delaying implementation of the agreements. And then we move on to the Gambia. And Justice Minister Dauda Jallow has held discussions with senior officials of the regional body ECOWAS to establish a hybrid court to prosecute former President Yahya Jammeh for alleged human rights abuses during his 22-year-old rule. Mr. Jammeh's 22-year-old rule, which ended in 2017, was characterized by alleged human rights abuses. Earlier this year, a government white paper recommended that Mr. Jammeh and 69 others be prosecuted for alleged crimes committed during his rule from July 1994 to January 2017, and some of these wrongdoings he has since denied. Mr. Jammeh currently lives in exile in Equatorial Guinea, but commands significant support among the Gambians. He fled the Gambia in 2017 after losing elections to current President Adama Barrow. There are growing calls for Mr. Jammeh to be prosecuted, but there are concerns that it might endanger security and stability. Members of what has been alleged to be Mr. Jammeh's killing squad, also called the Junglers, are facing prosecution in Germany, Switzerland, and the United States. Other members are hiding in West African countries, while others who are arrested and testified at the Gambians Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commissions are working freely in the Gambia and yet to face any prosecution. And then we head over to Mali. At least 13 people were killed following a raid by the Malian army and a group that locals identified as Russia's Wagner mercenary group on the 30th of October. They said the army and mercenaries targeted ethnic Fulanis during the raid. Residents said a woman and child were among those killed in the attack on Gweledi village in Tenenko, Mopti region, according to AFP news agency. Several suspected jihadists were also arrested during the operation. According to an association for the promotion of Fulani culture, more than 20 civilians were killed in the area, but this was denied by the Malian military source, the AFP has reported as well. The Malian army has long been accused of abuses, including by the country's United Nations mission, MINUSMA, and it is said to have hired the services of Wagner, whose actions have been decried. Bamako denies this and says it has cooperation with the Russian army because of a long-standing state-to-state relationship. The Kremlin has previously denied any involvement with Wagner. Mali has been facing a security, political and humanitarian crisis since the outbreak of independence and jihadist insurgencies in 2012 in the north. The government claims to have reversed the poor security trend. We go to Burkina Faso. Defense Minister on Tuesday declared the country was fighting for survival in its 7-year-old battle with jihadists as he urged the public to throw themselves into the campaign. One of the poorest and most volatile countries in the world, the landlocked Sahel state, is struggling with a jihadist offensive launched from neighboring Mali in 2015. Thousands of soldiers, police officers and civilians have been killed, and around 2 million people in a population of 21 million have fled their homes, and more than a third of the country is outside government control. Disgruntled army officers have carried out 2 coups this year in a show of anger at failures to roll back the insurgency last Wednesday. The authorities launched a drive to recruit 50,000 members of civilian auxiliary force, the Volunteers for the Defense of the Fatherland. Why don't you just say motherland? I mean, what's with that? But anyway, we'll come to that story just shortly. We move over to Algeria. Arab leaders gathered in the Algerian capital on Tuesday for their first summit since a string of normalization deals with Israel that have divided the region. Since the last Arab League summit in 2019, several members of the 22-member bloc, for decades a forum for Strident declarations of support for the Palestine cause have normalized ties with the Jewish state. The United Arab Emirates went first in a historic U.S.-mediated deal that made the country the third Arab state after Egypt and Jordan to establish full ties with Israel. The UAE's move sparked similar accords with Bahrain and Morocco and provisional agreement with Sudan, deepening Morocco's decades-old rivalry with its neighbor Algeria. This week's summit, postponed several times due to the coronavirus pandemic, coincides with elections in Israel that could see hawkish ex-Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu return to power with his far-right allies. Algeria remains a steadfast supporter of Palestinians, even mediating a reconciliation deal in October between rival factions Fatah and Hamas. While few believe the deal will last, it was seen as a public relations coup for Algeria, which has been seeking for regional clout on the back of its growing status as a gas exporter following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This week's summit is another opportunity for President Abdelhajid Tebboune to push that agenda forward despite high-profile Arab leaders being absent from the said summit. Washington on Monday reiterated fears that Rwanda is supporting a rebellion in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, whose rapid advances have led to Kinshasa to expel the border country's ambassador. During a visit to both countries in August, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken warned of credible reports of Rwanda's support for the M23 rebels, a former Tutsi rebellion. He said U.S. officials have been in frequent contact with their Rwandan and DRC counterparts over the past week as tensions have risen after several weeks of calm. The M23 have been advancing since October 20th into Rutshuru territory north of Goma. The M23 movement is a former Tutsi rebel that took up arms again at the end of the 2021, blaming Kinshasa for not respecting agreements on the reintegration of its fighters. Kinshasa announced on Saturday evening the expulsion of the Rwandan ambassadors to DRC after 2 months of tensions and accusations of support for the M23 denied by Kigali, which in turn claims that the DRC is collaborating with Rwandan Hutu rebels. Relationships between Rwanda and Democratic Republic of Congo are as conflicted as they are historic mud for nearly 30 years in the aftermath of the 1994 Rwanda's genocide. The Economic Community of West African States Center for Renewable and Energy Efficiency has reaffirmed its commitment to ensuring sustainable energy across the ECOWAS member states by 2030. The Executive Director, ECREE, Mr. Francis Simpore, made this known on Tuesday in Abuja during the closing ceremony of the 7th edition of ECOWAS Sustainable Energy Forum 2022. The news agencies of Nigeria reported the 7th edition of the forum by that organization is organized in collaboration with Nigeria's Ministry of Power. The director said the agency was reaffirming its commitment to ensuring that sustainability of renewable energy by bringing together key stakeholders in the energy sector to discuss and provide solutions to the energy challenges in the member states. And then Kenya is deploying the first contingent of a regional peacekeeping force to Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. President William Ruto will this morning preside over flagging off ceremony in Nairobi for the Kenya Defence Forces KDF battalion joining the regional forces. The Kenyan troops, who will be in the Democratic Republic of Congo as part of the East African Community Force, will help the Congolese army's efforts to quell the violence in the region. Some Kenyan troops have already been installing logistical support systems in the DRC since September in readiness for the planned operations against the rebels. The EAC agreed on a troop deployment deal to combat rebels earlier this year. The Kenyan contingent's first mission will be to help recapture the border city of Bunagana that was seized by the M23 rebels in June. And then we conclude our news from Ghana on Tuesday. Ghana assumed the presidency of the United Nations Security Council for November as debates on violent extremism and terrorism in Africa topped its agenda. The permanent representative of Ghana to the United Nations in New York, Ambassador Harold Agyeman, said this while briefing correspondents at the United Nations headquarters on the program of work and Ghana's priorities during this month. The Security Council, which is composed of 15 member states, is the organ of the UN authorized by the Charter with primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. Ghana, shall preside over the meetings of the Council, where there will be adoptions, debates, and consultations, and under its authority shall represent the Security Council in its capacity as an organ of the United Nations within this month. He said that the debates would focus on addressing those challenges in line with his priority for leadership of the Security Council, which is enhancing global peace and security for sustainable and inclusive development. That's a lot, and that is the end of our very long news bulletin this morning, and we are joined on the other side by Samuel Tawish. Samuel Tawish, a very good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Miriam Mogutu, from our communication headquarters. Also, good morning and good evening, good afternoon to our viewers who are watching this program in Kenya, Africa, and the rest of the world. It is indeed my pleasure to join you on this program.
So I know we've been talking about this story of the Democratic Republic of Congo every day, and for good reasons, because it should be on the top of the agenda in the conversations that we're having about Africa, because the things that are happening there, if they're not brought under control as soon as possible, we'll see more damage. A lot has happened. People are suffering. So we need to intensify this conversation so that stakeholders get to know this is a matter of urgency. We don't let it, continue to get worse as it already is. So this morning, Kenya is sending its first contingent. Remember that agreement that was held under our former president, Uhuru Kenyatta. There was an agreement that the East African Community Bloc should send the forces there, a peacekeeping force in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And so Kenya is living up to that commitment. And this morning, Kenya's President William Ruto will be flagging off the first contingent of our peacekeeping force to under the East African Community Force to go and help the Congolese army's efforts to quell the violence in the region. How do you feel about that?
Thank you so much, Miriam. First and foremost, I think it's the right thing to do in as far as what is happening in DR Congo is concerned. Because again, we have a tradition of reneging on agreements every now and then. And I think Kenya is now becoming, getting into the forefront and becoming a role model in the region as one which really would want to see the conflict in DR Congo really brought to an end. And one way of bringing this conflict to an end is one supporting the initiatives and the efforts by the Democratic Republic of Congo itself, and also the initiatives by the East Africa community to make sure that we help our brothers and sisters in DR Congo to try and contain or manage the situation as it were in DR Congo. So it's a good gesture. President William Ruto, of course, today, as you have alluded to, that he will be flagging off a contingent of military officers who will be joining the rest of the forces who are already on the ground in DR Congo, just trying to contain that situation. So this is a step in the right direction, and it is my hope that with the going in of the Kenyan military forces into DR Congo will really help and bolster the morale of the officers already on the ground, so that by the end of the day we can see some victory on the part of DR Congo, and also victory for the East African region in terms of containing the situation in that part of the continent. So yes, it's a good thing, and I hope that we are going to also have more resources to help these soldiers on the ground, because it's not, like I've reiterated many times, Miriam, it's not enough just to send their troops, many troops on the ground, but we'll also want to see, resources and technical support really being given to these soldiers so that they are able really to undertake their job as it should. So those are some of the things we'll really want to see being addressed, not only by the region, but also by the UN Security Council, so that by the end of the day, we are able to see success and bigger achievements in pacifying this part of the continent.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. And we've seen Kenya from the reports that we've received that the president will be flagging off the first contingent of the East African Community Force that was agreed upon. But there have also been calls, matter of fact, it's on Monday, there were protests in the parts of the Democratic Republic of Congo where the citizens there were protesting against Rwanda and for its alleged support of the M23 rebels there. We've talked about this. I will not even get into the details. And just before that, there's a news I read from the US, which is saying, yes, Rwanda, stop backing the M23 rebels. But those allegations that Rwanda has since denied. And so there has been increased call even by the people in the Democratic Republic of Congo saying, we don't have a problem with the East African Community Force, except we don't want Rwanda, Uganda, and Burundi to be part of that. So for the interest of actually finding a lasting solution and where perhaps we will not have any clash as far as interest is concerned, could it be wise maybe for Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi not to be part of this force? I don't know how that will be because it's supposed to be the East African Community Force. And then the countries who seem to be on a neutral ground, perhaps to be joined by some other countries from SADC, because these two countries are both in SADC. DRC is in SADC, so perhaps we could get also support from other countries in SADC, and also perhaps a few from the East African community, which don't seem to have a conflict of interest as far as this conflict is concerned, so that you're able to start in a good footing.
Well, Miriam, this is not any other ordinary operation. This is an operation that is well guided, and I think there are principles and terms and conditions of operations. So one, we wouldn't quite say maybe every other nation that wishes to join the forces in DR Congo can do so voluntarily. I think there are guiding principles as to which forces can be able to join. And in this case, when you have, for instance, Democratic Republic of Congo raising or registering misgivings and reservations about the participation of particular countries, like, for example, Rwanda, or even Burundi, or Uganda, or any other country for that matter. So I don't think it will serve the purpose really for Rwanda to force itself to have the troops in DR Congo, when, of course, DRC itself feels like Rwanda is playing a hidden card and supporting secretly the operations by the M23 rebels. So it will be prudent really to allow the Democratic Republic of Congo to accommodate the forces that they suppose genuinely and honestly supporting their cause in trying to flush out the M23 rebels. But again, Miriam, something also worth noting is that, when you look into it with the generality, do we have enough forces, even if, say, for example, Rwanda or Burundi or any other nation does not send the troops to DR Congo? Do we have from the rest of the region really enough troops to be able to help their counterparts in DR Congo? And as for the case of DR Congo not having its own troops in this operation, I might not think that is something that is practical, because one, the soldiers that are being sent to DR Congo to help their counterparts there will really need the kind of, I would say, the logistical support. They will also need some kind of understanding of the terrain and how this operation is going to be carried out. And therefore, they will no doubt need the support of their counterparts in DR Congo. They should be the ones at the forefront, really, showing them how this is going to be done, so that the rest of the region can be able to support them. You understand, Miriam, when we had, of course, a number of police officers who were killed in Suguta Valley, I suppose, in Samburu a couple of years ago, over 40 of them. And the argument was, the Kenya police did send these officers to the ground when they do not necessarily understand the terrain. They do not understand the hideouts of the bandits in this particular place. They do not understand how to say where to run to if they are ambushed by these bandits. So in itself, it became very difficult, and they could not also be able to understand the terrain in those parts of the country. So I think the same situation applies with what is happening in DR Congo, and it will only be better if we have the soldiers from DRC themselves helping, and of course helping in terms of logistical, and also showing how this operation is going to be done. So in itself, I suppose for now, Rwanda should desist and allow these other troops really to proceed with that operation. And we will also want to see a much more negotiation in terms of the warring parties and also the reservation that DR Congo has on Rwanda, so that by the end of the day, we do not create an enemy from this war, more enemies rather from this war. I mean, DR Congo is trying to fight and flush out these M23 rebels. So we will not want to see a scenario where in the process of dealing or flashing out the M23 rebels, that DR Congo is also creating enmity with Rwanda by virtue of what they allege to be the participation or involvement of Rwanda in sponsoring and giving resources to M23 rebels. So it's something that must be addressed adequately so and urgently, so that by the end of the day, we do not create more enemies and enmity between these neighboring countries. We do not want to see this kind of situation that is in DR Congo beginning again to fight as neighboring countries. This is not something we want to see in our region. We want to see more of our nations really become peaceful, become good neighbors. And that way, we need to prosper as a whole region and as a whole continent.
Very well, and I think the best way to perhaps win this conflict, if you want to win even the confidence of the people of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and like you have said there, and I believe the army of the DRC army is already on the ground, they're just overwhelmed, so that's why they require the support of the rest of the forces from wherever they can get, but also just the people on the ground, the people themselves, who can be very useful as far as information is concerned and cooperating with these forces, and for these players to win the confidence of the people in Congo, then the countries that have participated directly or indirectly in invading or occupying any part of the DRC and who are being accused, I think it will be prudent, at a wish, like you said, for these countries to be left out. But the problem is, maybe the DRC might decide, or the DRC already said, perhaps Rwanda's army might not be part of that. But Rwanda has a problem with, fine, if we are not part of that, why is Uganda part of that? So there's that rivalry that really has acted to fuel this war between Rwanda and Uganda as far as this conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo is concerned. So they always feel like if Uganda is there and you're not there, they feel threatened by the presence of Uganda being on the table and them being absent because of other factors that we will not get into right now. But also, even as these forces go in there, should it also be prudent, Tawish, for there to be clear objectives and the areas of operation, the duration and things like that? I know it's a war, so we don't know how long that's going to take, but you don't want another Somalia, position that KDF find itself in because of not just KDF, but other forces that are helping. But we need a clear objective and the areas of operation and also the duration that perhaps these forces might take there and what they intend to do. I don't know if that is clear.
It may not be very clear for now, and particularly to us from this other side, rather than civilians, because that is, it's a military operation. And there are so many things that may not necessarily come to the public for, because again, these are very sensitive and complex kind of operation, and some sensitive information may not necessarily be shared to the public. But I'm very sure, Miriam, that there must be, there must be terms and conditions. There must be points of references in terms of how this operation is going to be carried out. There must have been goals which have been set to be achieved after a given period of time, so that we do not just carry out the operations like playing football in a marked field. We do not know where to score and when to do an audit to understand how we have fared so far. So I'm very confident and optimistic that, of course, there are those set goals and things that this operation seeks really to achieve. I want to make sure that the infighting stops altogether. Second is that these M23 rebels have been subdued. And another thing that must be achieved, in my own understanding, is that there must then the negotiations or mediations to see into it how the M23 rebels and the view that the government holds really can be harmonized or having a compromise in terms of bringing all these parties on the table and understanding exactly what are the grievances. Because by the end of the day, even the M23 rebels, in as much as they're engaging themselves in these radical activities and what appears to be an attempt to destabilize DR Congo, they remain the citizens of DR Congo. And even in the face of this operation, I'm very sure that once the successes have been registered in terms of subduing these M23 rebels, they'll need to sit down with government and see what is it that can be done so that they can continue, they can get back to staying together harmoniously. There must be grievances, of course, we understand, and those grievances now they cannot be addressed without having a ceasefire, without this situation being contained. So the first thing first is about dealing with this threat of genocide and killings of innocent civilians. And once that is done, I'm very sure that maybe the African Union and the UN Security Council will be able to bring on table the leadership of the M23 rebels as well as government representatives to see into it how they can be able to strike, a truce so that by the end of the day, the people of Democratic Republic of Congo can live together in unison. We do not want to see another disintegration or another part of DR Congo really being hived off or an attempt to try and divide the Congo simply because of the grievances that can be addressed. So those are some of the, I think, the steps that I presume traditionally happen when you have such kind of operations. But one thing that must be done, firstly, is to make sure that peace has been restored and there's no ongoing war in DR Congo before the parties can now sit down and decide on the next course of action. Miriam.
Okay, and as I had informed you there earlier, Washington on Monday reiterated fears that Rwanda is supporting a rebellion in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, whose rapid advances have led Kinshasa to expel its ambassador. And the U.S. officials say they have been in frequent contact with their Rwandan counterparts and Burundi, DRC's counterparts as well. So that is what the U.S. said. So before we leave matters, East Africa, the process towards a single currency for the countries that form the East African community is years behind schedule. That's according to Rwanda's President Paul Kagame. He said this on Tuesday during a meeting of the Legislative Assembly of the 7-member bloc in Kigali. Mr. Kagame said the EAC is currently underfunded and thus delaying the implementation of projects and programs. He added that despite the delay, the East African Monetary Institute was necessary for achieving the monetary union, and that has been something that has been pushed in the East African Community Bloc. The bloc had set July 2021 to start the East African Monetary Institute, the precursor to the East African Central Bank. So we're supposed to have the East African Central Bank and a single currency by 2024. That is just like 2 years away, if I could just say that slightly, almost 2 years away. I don't know. A single currency by 2024, with everything else going on in this bloc, Samuel Tavish, how viable is this idea right now?
Maybe, yes, it remains a good idea, but it is just as it is, because again, these are some of the things we've all along been preaching. Over 60 years since most African countries really got independence, you cannot understand why we still struggle and continue to discuss about something that needs not so much effort really to implement. Just having a single currency in the African continent, I don't think that there's so much in terms of logistics or what has to be done for this to be implemented. I think there's generally no goodwill or intention or the determination really to have this put into effect. Because you remember, these are some of the things that the likes of the now late Muammar Gaddafi of Libya, the founding fathers, for example, Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, and others really advocated for. How many years down the line, ever since most of these countries really got independence, how many years down the line, even after their demise, and we cannot be able to move ahead or move with speed to implement this. I think there's so much in terms of misgiving amongst most African countries in terms of how this is going to be harmonized to have a single currency. There are those nations in the African continent who, to some extent, feel like they are superior to others, and feel like maybe by bowing onto these calls to have a single currency is going to say to negate the strength of the currency of these respective nations. And that is why you see there's not been a very serious commitment or an effort towards really realizing this. Others, Miriam, I think it will for now remain just a pipe dream. I'm not very sure even the 2024 timeline will be met, because we have set ourselves timelines after timelines, but nothing is coming into full realization. So it is a wait and see scenario. Maybe this time around there could be a pleasant surprise. Let's wait and see.
And I know countries in this bloc have not been agreeing to some of these things. You see, we already have a charter here in the East African community where there should be free movement of goods and services and people and all that. But a few times we've seen, especially between Kenya and Tanzania during President Magufuli's time, we saw how that was playing out. And so we do have these things in place, some of these things that are not even adhered to by member states. So one currency, 2024, I'll join in the waiting and seeing game, I think. But I think it will be a good thing. But with everything else that we have to deal with right now, and all this disagreements.
You remember, Miriam, there was a time, there was a moment when we had the former president of US, that is Donald Trump, when he said Africa is a shithole country or continent for that matter. And there was a lot of bashing on President Donald Trump as to why exactly he was referring to African continent as a shithole country. And now you can understand probably, because even when you talk about the issue of having, leave alone the single currency, even the issue of, a common or single passport for the Africans, it has just but remained a pipe dream. We cannot be able to move with speed and implement this. Today, it's easier even to admit, say, foreigners or people who come from the Western power countries to our nation. They get it with a lot of ease. They access our countries with a lot of ease at the port of entry. But for an ordinary African, really, even going to the neighboring countries, it is so difficult. So there are a lot of obstacles, and these obstacles, I think, have been created by ourselves and more so by the leadership. And that's why you see we're not making any headway in terms of having a single currency, in terms of having a single business permit in the continent of Africa, just to allow free trade and free movement of people, the one or a common passport in the African continent. All of these things really remain but a pipe dream. But I think it's because of the selfishness of most of these nations and their leadership. And that's why you see it's not easy really to realize this. Even today, if you are to call for, say, a summit to agree on some of these things, they will agree on paper, but when it comes to action, you wouldn't quite see anything happening, Miriam. So that's why I highly doubt, and I'm very pessimistic, you allow me, on this, that there's so much we will achieve, even with the timelines that we have given ourselves, that at least by 2024, we would have realized the single currency for the African continent. This is something that hopefully will be alive. We'll continue to discuss right here on Punchline Africa TV to get to understand if there will be any progress to that effect, Miriam.
Yes, and we don't have much time, so they better hurry up. The people who are supposed to be, designing these currencies, they better get to working, because we only have 2023. If at all 2024 was a serious deadline, it was a serious deadline. We only have next year, God willing. We're coming to the end of this year. And so, okay, we'll just wait and see how that will play out. But I can assure you there's some countries which will sabotage that. They're really not interested in some of these things. I don't know what they fear, but it will be a good move for the bloc. Now, Malawian activists who have been released on bail say they will continue nationwide protests to demand decisive action against official corruption. So they were arrested on Friday because they were protesting against the rising number of corruption cases in Lazarus Chakwera's government. That bishop that was elected and became the president of the Republic of Malawi, and I think with him came a lot of hope and aspiration, and perhaps the people of Malawi were looking for something different, and they hoped that he will have a different kind of leadership or governance, maybe because he was a church leader, so maybe he was looked at differently, and perhaps the expectations were being so high. I think I also had thought he would be different until he named his first cabinet, where we had a brother holding a different docket, and then a sister to that brother holding a different docket, and then their cousin, another. It was like a family reunion. So I had a huge problem. So for me, that already I had some issues with, and I just wondered how the rest of his governance would look like. So this activists were protesting against the high rising corruption in the country and other issues that are plaguing Malawi. So what I'm wondering is the level of intolerance we see across Africa. We have these freedoms that people are supposed to enjoy. I mean, let them protest and go home, as long as they're not destroying properties, as long as they have went through the proper channels to seek for that permission. In fact, they should be given police protection. What is it about our leaders and being criticized? Well, these activists are just trying to hold the president accountable over the things that he said, which we should, even right here. We're not activists, but we have that role as well.
Sure, Miriam. The right to picket and protest or demonstrate are rights that are guaranteed by Constitution. So I believe in most African countries, if not Kenya alone. And I believe is the case in Malawi. And Miriam, you've rightly put it that we will need really from time to time to continue holding our governments onto account, especially in respect to the pledges that they do make in the run-up to elections. And when the citizenry come out to register their displeasure about how governments are being run, I think it's only necessary, absolutely so, that these governments and their leaderships really recognizes that they're not there just because they want to be there, but because the people have given them the mandate to represent and speak for them and provide services that are necessary for the people and for the growth of these respective nations. But that is not the case with most African countries and our leaders, Miriam. Our leaders in this continent have taken upon themselves that getting into the leadership position, when it's more about enriching themselves, their cronies and their family members, it's about engaging in corrupt activities, and they will not want anyone really to question. It's not about service delivery to the people, but how they can be able to build palatial homes, how they can be able to fly with luxurious cars, to drive rather luxurious cars, how they can be able to have overseas trips now and then. How they can be able to have the best, to dine with the mighty, and not necessarily concentrating on uplifting the livelihood of the people, providing essential services to the people. We will want to see scenarios and situations where the leaders really put the interests of the people first. We are able to give and provide the services that are needed for the growth of a nation and for the uplifting of the livelihoods of the people. And the case as is in Malawi, Miriam, today, it is so despicable, it is so discouraging. And I think with the kind of demonstration and protests that are ongoing in Malawi, could only but send a signal to the leadership that something new has to be done. Otherwise, such kind of demonstrations and displeasures can lead to an uprising. I mean, they have happened before, and don't be surprised. And I do not think Malawi is any exemption. That if the people decide, because the sovereignty again lies with the people, if they decide that your reign or regime has to come to an end, then they'll go to the streets and they will demonstrate. Because you cannot kill people in their thousands or in the millions just for the sake of you remaining in power when they feel like you're no longer serving their interests. So that is a very great signal sent to the leadership in Malawi. They must do, a different thing altogether. They must be able to rise to the occasion and provide that which the people are asking, and make sure just they respond by, fulfilling the pledges and promises they made in the run-up to the election. Otherwise, as they say, power is transient. Today, you are in power. Tomorrow, you're not in power. So this must really click on the minds of those in the leadership positions today, that they will not be there for eternity, that there will come a time for transition, and they must do, when it is their turn, really to do things right, or to be in leadership, they must do things the way the people desire. If not, then they will face the wrath of the public. They'll face the wrath of the electorate, especially even when they get a chance to go to the ballot in the next election, Miriam.
All right, very well. There's still no update on the ongoing mediation process in South Africa between Ethiopia and the TPLF. And so we have no new update. I really tried scouting for some news on that. But I want to believe that the mediation process is going on well, hopefully, because now the time that they were supposed to be giving us the update or the mediation was supposed to have ended on a Sunday that lapsed, and then there was an extension for Monday, and then it was thought they will end yesterday and Tuesday. So today is Wednesday, the 2nd of November. We've not heard any word or any update from what is happening in South Africa, where a former president of Nigeria is leading the mediation process. Olusegun Obasanjo being helped by former president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, and of course former South Africa's vice president is also present, and that mediation is under the auspices of the African Union, and they're trying to have conversations around how to end that conflict that is currently ongoing in the Tigrayan region between the government of Ethiopia, the Tigray People Liberation Forces, and the country that is Eritrea decided to invite itself in that chaos. So anyway, so I think that is what we have. We'll take a short break because we do have another show at 11 a.m. where we shall continue with some of these conversations. I think we will just put a stop there. But before I do, there's some news about Somalia and some of the sanctions that the U.S. government has put on some. Yeah, the U.S. has sanctioned the Islamic State group in Somalia, and several of its alleged members say to be smuggling arms in East Africa. The IS mainly operates in the country's northeast, where it targets security forces and civilians in attacks. Despite receiving regional and international support, Somalia continues to grapple with deadly militant violence. IS Somalia, that is the Islamic State in Somalia, has been active in the Horn of African nations since 2015. So the sanctioned individuals are accused of providing support to the group's intelligence unit, smuggling arms across East Africa, and coordinating high-profile attacks. And I think it is such activities, Tawish, that the government of Somalia last time, I remember they were looking to have the sanctions, the arms embargo lifted. Is it this month on the 6th? That's where the other embargo is meant to be ending. So they were campaigning to and seeking support for the arms embargo to be lifted. We know there is arms embargo against Somalia, South Sudan, and other countries because of the volatility and the continued conflict in this country. So they're not supposed to be allowed to buy any arms or any of that from any country across the world. But when you look at these extremist groups and how they're receiving support, so the arms that the Somali government is not allowed to buy, these terrorist groups are able to be provided for illegally by these other players that are supporting, equipping them in Somalia. So when Somalia's government was citing such as an example, why they should also be allowed to be well equipped, does it have some standing now, perhaps?
Well, Miriam, I think this is a topic that we have really had a couple of weeks ago, as regards to really whether it is time to, to lift the arms embargo in Somalia. And they have also been pushing for the same and calling for the support of the rest of the region, really, to support them in their calls, really, to have this arms embargo lifted. Because again, the complexity of the situation in terms of the what is going on in Somalia, really, according to Somalia, will only be fair if the arms embargo is, of course, limited. It is also in the consideration of most of the African leaders that this is the time, really, for the UN to see it fit rather to lift the arms embargo. I may not necessarily I may not speak authoritatively as to whether it is time to allow the same to happen, Miriam, because again there are so many factors to be determined. There are so many considerations to be put in place before eventually such. The arms embargo is lifted or such decisions are made, and it is only prudent that we leave it to the relevant authorities to see into it after their due diligence and determination as to whether now it is ripe and right for the arms embargo to be lifted in Somalia. Of course, we understand the challenge that they're experiencing because, again, the government cannot be able to buy these arms from anywhere in the world. But again, the terrorist groups continue really to cause mayhem and havoc, and they have one of the most complicated weaponry, sophisticated rather weaponry that they're using against the government forces in Somalia. So how to strike the balance, I think, is where the problem is, because again, how they can be able to access this very sophisticated weaponry to fight the government and the troops in Somalia, yet we could not allow the government that is legitimately in place really to be able to access or buy these arms from anywhere in the world is also in itself a very big challenge. So we need to get a level where we strike a balance and understand so far Somalia has made quite some progress. There's a stable government in place. They have the national army and security apparatus in place. They have been well equipped and trained. It is only good that we can also be able to give them the necessary weaponry they will need to first be able to deal with the Al-Shabaab threat in Somalia, but more importantly also just to protect themselves against any other attack. This cannot be achieved if we limit supply and purchase of weaponry for Somalia.
All right, and as much as that, I'd like to push that conversation further, but we have to stop because we have that topic on our next show, so we shall come back to that. So I think we just put a stop. We were meant to be looking at the COP27. I must have missed that, and so. But I think unless the convention, the summit starts, it's meant to be starting on the 6th. That's when we can get actually new information because we've been talking about it. I don't know if there are any developments so far, but I think it will be interesting to see where Africa stands and what has changed and what Africa seeks to gain from this COP27 that is said to be happening in Egypt. So that's where we put a stop this morning. This has been Good Morning Africa. Thank you so much, Samuel Tawish, for your input this morning. My name is Miriam Ogutu. You have a good day and a very good morning to you.